I will get right into it. So I'm going to show you an observation from my trip that I took a couple weeks ago to start us off here. And that is a couple mating monarch butterflies. So today I'm going to talk about butterfly migration, more specifically monarch migration, because it's one that a lot of us are familiar with. And it's one that has a lot of information out there about it already. And of course you can tell this is a monarch, just as a quick clarification primer for people, by the lack of a bar on the rear of the wing here. You can see the difference here. On the right, we've got a viceroy, which is a monarch mimic with the bar on the back of the wing. And on the left, we've got the true monarch, which doesn't have the bar there. So butterflies, of course, migrate to make use of resources. The monarch, for example, has a pretty specific host plant for its caterpillars, as many lepidopterans do. That's the milkweed. So monarchs will migrate north to make use of the plentiful milkweed that we have over much of our continent here, and then they'll migrate back south in the winter to make use of the resource, which is the weather, not freezing to death with the harsh winters of much of the North American continent. So monarch migration is pretty hard to study. If you think about bird migration, we study it a lot by tagging birds. Birds live for a long time, so one tagged bird can give you a lot of information. You can tag monarchs. It's possible. As you can see here, this is I think Kansas University program here of tagging monarchs. And that is useful in getting some figures about the general population size and the movement of those populations. But there's the added difficulty of studying monarch migration, which is that monarchs don't live for very long. In fact, no monarch makes the round trip really from the upper North American continent down to Mexico and back. These migrations actually include multiple generations of monarchs. So while a tagged monarch can give you some really important information, it's not going to give you information for a very long time. And it's not going to give you a super complete view of the total movements of the species throughout the season. So butterflies are really impressive in their migratory abilities. We don't really completely understand them yet. There are lots of different things that different species of butterflies and different populations even seem to use in terms of navigation. They use things like coastlines and mountain ranges. It's theorized that they even use major roads sometimes as landmarks in their migration. Of course, there's also the method of the sun. There are all kinds of really fascinating studies of the kinds of navigation that butterflies do through that. They kind of have an internal clock that tells them if the sun is at this point in the sky, they can kind of do some dead reckoning and figure out where due north is or something like that. And similarly, moths use the moon for navigation, as we're all familiar with by the fact that they are very attracted to all of our lamps. And they also are theorized to use the magnetic field of the Earth to migrate as well. So pretty much any sort of information that you can think of about your environment that you can get, it's theorized that some butterflies or moths use it as part of their navigation when they're migrating. And of course, not all butterflies migrate. A key difference between monarchs and viceroys is that viceroys do not migrate, and we'll talk a little more about that later. Another impressive thing about butterflies is butterfly migration is that they can both negotiate a strong headwind, which is kind of hard to imagine an insect doing, but something like a red admiral can just fly really low and adjust to a strong headwind and kind of fly from perch to perch and still continue its migration through some harsh weather. And the same red admirals can also keep their body temperature high enough to survive high in the air. They migrate sometimes at up to 2,000 feet. And the temperatures up there would be lethal for, or would be debilitating for a butterfly. But through the body heat they create from their activity, they're cold-blooded, but of course, the energy that it takes to flap its wings creates enough heat for these butterflies to survive the journey. And so you'll often see, if you're looking for butterfly migration, especially towards the southern end of the range where things are starting to coalesce or just leaving their kind of migratory roosts, big groups of butterflies. These are a group of tiger butterflies that have a different sort of migration in the Indian subcontinent. They migrate from east to west. But you see butterflies doing something like this where there's some sort of resource that's necessary for them in their migration. Right here, you can see that there's water. Might be a mineral-rich soil or something like that they're looking for some sort of resource there. And of course, the migration is pretty uneven and really branched. Some monarchs, of course, won't make the full journey, north or south. Of course, none make the round trip. Some might make it the full journey from, Mexico to Massachusetts or something like that. But you can see how much it's branched, how there are still some question marks in here of how certain populations move from one place to another and whether they do. Again, because getting really good, reliable information about this is hard. And that's actually one reason why butterfly migration interacts in a really cool way with things like iNaturalist and citizen science. Having these big pools of data for sightings of these butterflies is really useful in seeing how these things move, when different butterflies arrive, because scientists just simply can't afford to have people out in the field covering the United States in a very even way to get a really wide sample of the paths of these butterflies. And like I was saying, migration isn't super well understood. So there are a lot of different theories for how exactly monarchs migrate, particularly, and even why. There's this interesting theory that I found called the Columbus hypothesis that theorizes that monarch migrations on the scale that they happen today didn't even occur until the Northeast United States or the Northern United States was so thoroughly deforested, creating habitat for the host plant of the monarch, which is the milkweed. And to back this up, in the historical record, there aren't many mentions of monarch butterflies by early naturalists before these regions were deforested. So there are all kinds of variables in here that we're not sure of, but of course just the titanic phenomenon of these butterflies flying in huge masses over huge distances is obvious. Just the details we're not sure of. And so knowing the lifestyles of these butterflies, that they're migratory, can tell you a little bit about their behavior too. And this is actually going back to our difference between monarchs and viceroys, a useful distinction. If you can't get a good look at a monarch or viceroy, a good way to tell which one it is by how it's flying. So monarchs, which migrate, have this characteristic, volume off for that. They have this characteristic kind of flap, glide way of flying. You'll be able to see it a little bit here. These are kind of low to the ground, so they're flapping a little more, but once they're in the air, you can see them gliding a little more. And of course, you can reason that through, which is you can reason why they do that through, and that's because they migrate. Flat gliding helps you to conserve energy when you're traveling over these large distances. And if you're looking at a viceroy flying, a viceroy is going to be flying much more erratically. It's going to be using more energy, kind of strong wing flaps, and just not the same kind of like graceful, slow gliding movement of the monarch. So even once the monarch has completed its migration to where we are, we can see the effects of its migration and its lifestyle. So just a cool thing to be looking out for all times of the year for different types of migratory and non-migratory butterflies, and to help kind of flesh out the data that we have here, and a cool thing that you can have a direct impact on through citizen science. So that's that, monarch butterflies and general butterfly migration.